For a disorienting moment, she couldn't. For a disorienting moment, she couldn't remember where she was or how she'd gotten there. The charity gala. The champagne she'd barely touched. The panic attack that had seized her lungs when she'd spotted Marco Vitale's men watching her from across the room. And then, nothing. Elena's eyes fluttered open to find herself lying on a massive leather sofa in what appeared to be a private office. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed the glittering skyline of the city far below, and she realized with a jolt that she must be in one of the penthouse suites of the hotel where the gala had been held. But it was the suit jacket draped over her like a blanket that made her breath catch. Charcoal gray, impeccably tailored, still warm from someone's body heat and carrying that same intoxicating scent. "You fainted." The voice came from across the room, smooth as aged whiskey and twice as dangerous. Elena sat up abruptly, clutching the jacket to her chest as her eyes found him. Dante Marchesi stood by a mahogany bar cart, a crystal tumbler of amber liquid in his hand, watching her with the kind of intensity that made her feel like a specimen under glass. He swept back from a face that could have swept back from a face that could have been carved from marble, all sharp angles and aristocratic lines, with eyes so dark they appeared black in the dim lighting. "I'm sorry," Elena stammered, trying to stand on shaky legs. "I didn't mean to cause a scene. I should go." "Sit." It wasn't a request. Dante moved toward her with the fluid grace of a predator, and Elena found herself obeying before her brain could protest. He settled into the leather armchair across from her, those unreadable eyes never leaving her face. "You approached me tonight for a reason, Miss Rossi. Before you collapsed, you said you needed to speak with me about your father's debt." The words sent ice through Elena's veins. Of course he knew who she was. Men like Dante Marchesi made it their business to know everything about everyone who owed them money, or in her case, and everyone whose dead father had owed them a fortune. "My father died 2 years ago," she said, hating how small her voice sounded. "I've been making payments every month. I've never missed one. I'm aware." Dante took a slow sip of his drink, his gaze unwavering. "What I'm not aware of is why Marco Vitale's men have been following you for the past 3 weeks, or why you felt desperate enough to approach me in public tonight. So enlighten me, Elena. What has Marco done?" The casual use of her first name should have felt presumptuous, but instead it sent an unexpected shiver down her spine. Elena's hands twisted in the fabric of his jacket, and she realized she was still holding it like a security blanket. "He found out about the debt, about my connection to your family. He came to my apartment a week ago with photographs of my sister, Sophia. She's 19. She goes to the state university. He knows her class schedule, her dorm room number, the coffee shop where she works on weekends." Elena's voice cracked and she forced herself to breathe. "He wants me to spy on you, to pass along information about your business operations, your meetings, your connections. If I refuse, he said Sophia would have an unfortunate accident." Something flickered in Dante's eyes, there and gone so fast Elena might have imagined it. He set down his glass with deliberate care, and when he spoke again, his voice had dropped to a register that made the hair on the back of her neck stand up. "And you decided to come to me instead of doing what he asked. That was either very brave or very foolish." "I won't let him use me to hurt anyone," Elena said, lifting her chin with more confidence than she felt. "I'll do anything to protect Sophia. That's why I'm here. I want to offer myself as collateral for my father's debt. All of it. The full amount. If you agree to put Sophia under your family's protection, I'll work for you, live where you tell me to live, do whatever you need me to do until the debt is paid. I know Marco won't dare touch her if she's under the Marchesi family's protection." Dante leaned back in his chair, studying her with an expression she couldn't decipher. The silence stretched between them, heavy and charged, until Elena thought she might scream from the tension. Finally he spoke. "Marco Vitale has been a thorn in my side for years. He's been spreading rumors that I'm weak, unmarriageable, that the Marchesi family is vulnerable because I have no alliances through marriage. It's affecting business, making my enemies bold." He paused, his eyes locked on hers. I have a counter-proposal for you, Elena. One that solves both of our problems. Elena's heart hammered against her ribs. What kind of proposal? A fake engagement. You'll pose as my fiancé for 6 months, attend family dinners, appear at my side during business functions, convince everyone that we're madly in love. In return, I'll erase your father's entire debt, put Sofia under round-the-clock protection, and handle Marco permanently. When the 6 months are over, we'll stage a quiet breakup, and you'll walk away free and clear. The proposal was so unexpected that Elena could only stare at him. You want me to pretend to be engaged to you? To lie to your family and business associates? I want you to be convincing, Dante corrected, something almost like amusement touching the corners of his mouth. My father has been pressuring me to settle down for years. If I suddenly produce a fiancé, it will satisfy him and strengthen my position simultaneously. Marco won't dare move against you if you're publicly under my protection as my future wife. And you get your sister's safety guaranteed and your father's debt wiped clean. Everyone wins! Elena's mind raced through the implications. 6 months of pretending to be in love with a man she didn't know, a man whose reputation preceded him like a dark shadow. Dante Marchesi was heir to one of the most powerful crime families on the East Coast. People whispered about him in the same breath they whispered about executions and territory wars. But when she looked at him now, she didn't see a monster. She saw a man who had covered her with his jacket when she'd fainted, who had listened to her desperate plea without mocking her, who was offering her a way out of an impossible situation. Terms, she said, her voice steadier now. I want terms in writing. Something that might have been respect flickered in Dante's expression. Smart girl, here's what I'm offering. You move into my penthouse immediately, for appearances and for your safety. You'll have your own bedroom, your own space. No physical intimacy unless we're in public and it's necessary for the performance. You'll attend all required family and business functions as my fiancé. You keep your job at the gallery. In fact, I insist on it. A woman with her own career is more believable than a trophy wife. In exchange, Sofia gets assigned 2 of my best men for protection starting tonight. Your father's debt is forgiven in full. And I guarantee that Marco Vitale will never threaten either of you again. And after 6 months? Elena asked. After 6 months, we stage a mutual, amicable breakup. You walk away with your freedom, a clean slate, and my family's gratitude. I'll even provide a generous settlement to help you and Sofia start fresh somewhere safe if that's what you want. Dante stood and moved toward his desk, pulling out a leather portfolio. I'll have my attorney draw up a contract tomorrow, but I need your answer tonight. Marco won't wait, and neither can I. Elena looked down at the jacket still clutched in her hands, then back up at the man who was offering her a devil's bargain wrapped in a business proposition. Every instinct screamed that this was dangerous, that getting involved with Dante Marchesi would change her life in ways she couldn't predict. But when she thought of Sofia's bright smile, of her sister's dreams of becoming a teacher, of the terror in her own heart every time her phone rang, the choice became crystal clear. I have one more condition, Elena said, standing to face him. Sofia can never know the engagement is fake. She's been through enough with our father's death and the debt. I want her to believe I found someone who loves me, that something good came out of all this darkness. Can you do that? Dante extended his hand, and Elena noticed for the first time that his fingers were long and elegant, more suited to a pianist than a crime lord. I can be very convincing when necessary, he said. Do we have a deal, Elena? She placed her hand in his, and his grip was firm but not crushing, a gentleman's handshake. Not a threat. We have a deal. Good. Dante didn't release her hand immediately, and Elena felt heat creep up her neck at the contact. Pack a bag. You're moving in tonight. I'll send a car for you in 2 hours, and my men will collect Sofia from campus and bring her to a safe house until we can brief her on our engagement tomorrow. As far as the world is concerned, Elena Rossi, you're now my fiancée, and under my protection. That means you're untouchable. As Elena left his office, Dante's jacket still draped over her shoulders against the night chill, she heard him pick up his phone and begin speaking in rapid Italian. Even without understanding the words, she caught the change in his tone, from the careful negotiator who had spoken with her to something cold and lethal. He was already making moves against Marco, already activating whatever dark machinery men like him controlled. For the first time in months, Elena felt something that wasn't quite safety but wasn't quite fear either. She was stepping into a world she didn't understand, binding herself to a dangerous man through an elaborate lie. But as she walked to the elevator and pressed the button for the ground floor, she realized that Dante Marchesi had given her something precious in their brief negotiation. He had given her a choice. In a situation where she'd had none, he'd offered her agency, terms, and respect. The elevator doors closed, and Elena caught her reflection in the polished brass, a woman wearing a mobster's jacket-like armor, about to trade 6 months of her life for her sister's safety and her family's freedom. The pretending would start tomorrow, but tonight, alone in the descending elevator, Elena allowed herself one moment of raw honesty. She had no idea if she was making the best decision of her life or the worst. All she knew was that when Dante Marchesi had looked at her with those unfathomable dark eyes and called her a smart girl, something inside her had sparked to life, something that had been dormant since her father's death, and since she'd become nothing more than a debt to be collected and a target to be threatened. For 6 months, she would play the role of a lifetime, and maybe, just maybe, she would remember what it felt like to be more than afraid. The game had begun, and there was no turning back now. 3 months had passed since Elena Rossi became Dante Marchesi's fiancée, and she still wasn't used to waking up in a bedroom that was larger than her old apartment. The penthouse's guest room had become her sanctuary, a space decorated in soft creams and golds, with a window seat that overlooked the city, and bookshelves that Dante had personally stocked with her favorite authors, after asking her once, casually, what she liked to read. It was a detail that had surprised her, this small kindness from a man who was supposed to be nothing more than her business partner in an elaborate charade. The routine they had fallen into felt almost domestic in its predictability. Dante left early for meetings she didn't ask about, returning sometimes before dinner, sometimes long after midnight. Elena continued her work at the gallery, her commute now a luxury car with a driver named Thomas, and a security detail that followed at a discreet distance. Sunday dinners at Giovanni Marchesi's estate had become a weekly ritual, and Elena had discovered that Dante's father was nothing like she'd expected. Warm where his son was cold, effusive where Dante was contained, with a laugh that boomed through the ancestral dining room, and eyes that missed nothing. It was Giovanni who had fallen in love with her first, not his son. The old Don adored the way Elena brought fresh flowers to his table, how she asked about his late wife's recipes and actually listened to his stories about the old days. She spoke enough Italian to charm him and enough English to keep his sharper daughters-in-law on their toes. Most importantly, she looked at Dante like he hung the moon, and Giovanni, who had watched his son turn to ice after his brother's murder 5 years ago, was grateful for any warmth that might thaw the permafrost around his heir's heart. What Giovanni didn't know, what none of them knew except Dante's cousin Isabella, was that the warmth between Elena and Dante wasn't entirely an act anymore. It had started small, Dante's hand at the small of her back lasting a fraction longer than necessary, Elena's laugh at his dry wit becoming genuine rather than performed, the way he brought her coffee in the morning, prepared exactly how she liked it, without her ever having told him, the way she had started waiting up for him on nights when his meetings ran late, reading on the sofa in the living room instead of retreating to her bedroom, telling herself it was just concern for a business partner's safety. But it was the small hours of the night that told the truth their daylight selves refused to acknowledge. Elena had nightmares, terrible, vivid dreams of Marco's men taking Sophia, of her sister's screams, of being powerless to save her. The first time she'd woken gasping and terrified at 2 a.m, she'd found light spilling from under Dante's bedroom door across the hall. The second time, she'd crept to her doorway and seen his silhouette in his window, awake and keeping watch. The third time, she'd realized he never slept on the nights when she had nightmares, as if he could sense her distress through the walls and refused to rest until she did. They never spoke about it, this silent vigil he kept, just as they never spoke about how Dante came home some nights with bruised knuckles that he tried to hide, and how Elena would appear in the kitchen with ice packs and antiseptic, tending to his hands without asking questions, her touch gentle and sure. They existed in a strange limbo between pretense and reality, neither willing to name what was happening between them, both too afraid of what acknowledgement might cost. Isabella Marchesi had called them out on it exactly once, or cornering Elena at a family birthday party, while Dante held court with his father's associates across the garden. "You know he's falling for you," Isabella had said without preamble, her sharp green eyes studying Elena's face. "And unless I'm completely blind, which I'm not, you're falling for him too. So what happens in 3 months when this engagement is supposed to end? Have you two talked about that?" Elena had frozen, champagne glass halfway to her lips. "I don't know what you mean." This is an arrangement, nothing more." "Bullshit." Isabella's smile was knowing and not unkind. "I've known Dante since we were children. He hasn't looked at anyone the way he looks at you since—" She'd stopped herself, old pain flickering across her features. "Just be careful, Elena. Men in our world don't know how to love softly. When they fall like buildings collapsing, and Dante has been barely standing for 5 years." The conversation had haunted Elena for weeks, whispering in the back of her mind every time Dante's hand found hers under the dinner table, every time she caught him watching her at the gallery exhibitions he'd started attending, standing in the back with his security detail, scowling at abstract paintings but always staying until the last guest left. It all came crashing down on a Tuesday evening in late autumn. Elena had worked late at the gallery, cataloging a new acquisition, and stepped out into the parking garage at 8 o'clock, her mind on the dinner Dante had texted about earlier, something about trying to cook instead of ordering in, which she knew would end in disaster given his complete incompetence in the kitchen. She was smiling at the thought when the first man grabbed her arm. There were 3 of them, Marco's men, and they moved with the efficiency of professionals. Elena screamed, her purse falling to the concrete as they dragged her toward a black SUV with tinted windows. On training she didn't know she'd absorbed from 3 months of living with Dante kicked in. She fought like a wildcat, nails raking flesh, knee driving upward. She heard shouting, the screech of tires, and then Dante's security detail was there, materializing like avenging angels, and the parking garage erupted into violence. Elena was shoved behind Thomas, her driver, who had produced a gun from somewhere and was moving with lethal purpose. The fight was over in 90 seconds. Marco's men subdued, disarmed, bleeding on the concrete. And then Dante arrived, and Elena understood for the first time why people feared him. He moved through the parking garage like a force of nature, his tailored suit somehow making him more intimidating rather than less, every line of his body radiating controlled fury. He didn't look at Elena. Not yet. First, he looked at his men, assessing injuries with swift efficiency. Then he looked at Marco's men, and his expression went so cold that Elena felt the temperature drop. What happened next would stay with Elena forever. Dante spoke in Italian, his voice soft and deadly, his questions precise. She didn't understand all the words, but she understood the tone. This was judgment being passed, sentence being delivered. When he was satisfied with whatever answers he'd extracted, Dante gave a short nod to his men, and Marco's associates were hauled away, their fear palpable in the parking garage's fluorescent lighting. Only then did Dante turn to Elena, and the coldness shattered. His hands cupped her face with a gentleness that contradicted everything she'd just witnessed, his dark eyes scanning her for injuries, his thumb brushing over a scrape on her cheekbone that she hadn't noticed. "Are you hurt?" His voice was hoarse, raw with something that made her chest tighten. "I'm fine," she managed, though she was shaking. "They didn't. Your men got here in time." Dante pulled her towards his chest, one hand cradling the back of her head, and Elena felt the rapid hammer of his heart beneath her cheek. They stood like that for a long moment, his security detail giving them space, the aftermath of violence surrounding them. When he finally pulled back, his expression had shifted into something hard and resolute. "Get in the car. We're going home." Now. The ride back to the penthouse was silent. Dante's hand gripping hers with enough force to be almost painful, Elena too shocked to do more than hold on. It wasn't until they were back in the safety of his home, the door locked and alarmed behind them, that the dam broke. What were you thinking? Dante's voice was loud, harsh, as he paced the living room like a caged animal. The gallery closes at 6. Why were you there alone at 8 o'clock? Where was Thomas? I sent him home. Elena found her own anger rising to meet his, a defense against the fear still coursing through her veins. I had work to finish. I can't stop living my life just because a rival crime boss wants to use you to destroy me. Dante spun to face her, and she saw something raw in his expression. That's exactly why you need to be careful, Elena. Do you have any idea what Marco would have done if they'd gotten you in that car? Do you understand what I would have had to do to get you back? I'm not your property. Dante! The words burst out of her, 3 months of careful distance exploding. I'm not a possession to be guarded and controlled. I did what you asked. I play the perfect fiancé at your dinners. I smile for your father. I hold your hand at your meetings. But I won't be locked in a cage, even a gilded one. This isn't about control. Dante's voice dropped to something ragged. Marco killed my brother, Elena. 5 years ago, he lured Antonio into a meeting just like this, promised a truce, and sent us back his body in pieces. I've been patient. I've been strategic. I've been waiting for the right moment to end him. And then you walked into my life with your impossible proposition and your fierce loyalty to your sister, and suddenly... He stopped himself, running both hands through his hair, destroying its usual perfect order. Suddenly what? Elena took a step toward him, her heart in her throat. Suddenly I had something to lose again. The confession fell between them like a stone into still water. Dante looked at her with eyes that held years of carefully buried pain. I can't lose someone else to Marco. I won't. And somewhere in the last 3 months, this stopped being an arrangement for me. You matter, Elena. You matter in a way I didn't think anyone could matter anymore. And tonight, when Thomas called me, when he said Marco's men had you, his voice cracked, and he turned away, and shoulders rigid. Elena closed the distance between them, her hand finding his arm. Dante, look at me. When he didn't move, she stepped around to face him, and what she saw in his expression stole her breath. This was the man beneath the reputation, someone who had loved and lost, who had built walls so high to keep the pain out that he'd forgotten how to let anything else in. Until now. Until her. I'm not pretending anymore, she whispered. I haven't been for a while. When I wait up for you at night, when I tend to your hands, when I catch myself looking for you in every room I enter, that's not acting. That's not part of our deal. She touched his face, feeling the tension in his jaw. You terrify me, Dante Marchesi. Not because of who you are or what you do, but because I'm falling in love with you, and that wasn't part of the plan. The words hung in the air between them, irrevocable and true. Dante's hand came up to cover hers against his face, his eyes closing briefly as if her touch caused him physical pain. When he opened them again, the careful control he always maintained had crumbled completely. Elena. Her name was both question and answer, prayer and plea. She kissed him. Or he kissed her. Later, neither of them would be able to say who moved first. Only that when their lips met, it felt like the inevitable conclusion to 3 months of careful distance and careful lies. The kiss was desperate, months of restraint breaking like a dam, his hands in her hair, her fingers clutching his shirt, both of them trying to get closer despite the impossibility of the space between them already being gone. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Dante rested his forehead against hers. This complicates everything. I know. Elena's fingers traced the line of his jaw, learning the feel of him. We should probably talk about what this means, about the arrangement. Later. Dante kissed her again, softer this time, with a tenderness that made her heart ache. Right now, I just need you to be here. Be safe. Be alive. Tomorrow we'll figure out the rest." They spent the night on the sofa in the living room, not in passion but in conversation, really talking for the first time without the careful walls they'd both maintained. Dante told her about Antonio, about the kid brother who had been the family's hope before Marco snuffed out his light. He told her about the art history degree he'd abandoned when his father needed him to step into the family business, about the paintings he still loved even if he pretended to scowl at them. He told her about the crushing weight of being Giovanni Marchese's heir, knowing that every decision he made affected hundreds of families who depended on their organization for survival. Elena told him about her father's slow descent into gambling addiction, about dropping out of graduate school to support Sofia, about the crushing guilt of not seeing the warning signs until it was too late. She told him about the gallery job that had saved her, about losing herself in other people's art, because she'd stopped believing she deserved beauty in her own life. She told him about the nightmares that had plagued her since her father's death, about waking up terrified and alone, about feeling like she was drowning in responsibility with no one to share the weight. As dawn painted the windows gold, Elena found herself pressed against Dante's side, his arm around her shoulders, her head on his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heart. She felt his lips brush her hair, heard him murmur something in Italian that sounded like a promise. When she stirred, meaning to retreat to her own room before the household staff arrived, his arm tightened around her waist. "Stay," he said, his voice rough with exhaustion. "Please, just a little longer." So Elena stayed, and when she woke again hours later, Dante's body was pressed against hers on the sofa, not sexual but protective, his arm a barrier between her and the world, his breath warm against her shoulder. The morning light revealed the vulnerability in his sleeping face, the shadows under his eyes that spoke of too many sleepless nights keeping watch. She reached up to trace the line of his cheekbone, marveling at how different he looked without the armor of consciousness. This was the man she was falling for, not the heir to a crime empire, but the one who brought her coffee exactly how she liked it, who stood through gallery exhibitions he didn't understand because she cared about them, who had been keeping vigil outside her door for 3 months without ever asking for recognition or reward. Dante's eyes fluttered open, immediately focusing on her face with an intensity that made her breath catch. For a moment, they simply looked at each other, both aware that something fundamental had shifted between them. The pretense was gone, stripped away by honesty and fear and something that felt dangerously close to love. "What happens now?" Elena asked softly. Dante's hand found hers, fingers intertwining. "Now I end this. No more waiting, no more strategy. Marco threatened you, and that means he's crossed a line there's no coming back from. I'm going to dismantle his organization piece by piece, and when I'm done, he won't be able to threaten anyone ever again." "That sounds dangerous." "It is." Dante brought her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles with deliberate care. "But you need to understand something, Elena. I'm going to make you safe, truly safe. Not because of our arrangement, not because I owe it to you, but because I can't build a life with you on a foundation of fear, and I want that life. I want Sunday dinners where my father thinks we're acting when we're not. I want you waiting up for me at night because you choose to, not because you're paid to. I want to wake up with you in my arms like this every morning. So I'm going to finish what Marco started 5 years ago, and then..." He paused, something almost like uncertainty crossing his features. "Then I'm going to ask you to marry me for real. Not as part of our deal, not to satisfy my father or strengthen my position, but because I choose you, Elena Rossi. And I'm hoping by then, you'll choose me too." Elena's eyes burned with tears she refused to shed. "I already have," she whispered. "I chose you weeks ago. I just wasn't brave enough to say it." The kiss he gave her then was different from the desperate collision of the night before. This was a promise, a beginning, an acknowledgement that they had both stumbled into something neither of them had planned for. When his phone rang, shattering the moment, Dante answered with clear reluctance, his eyes never leaving Elena's face. The conversation was brief, in Italian, and when he hung up, his expression had shifted back to business. "That was Giovanni," he said, sitting up and pulling Elena with him. He wants to move the wedding up. His health has been declining faster than he's let on, and he wants to see his oldest son married before... Dante's jaw tightened. He's giving us 6 weeks. 6 weeks. The fake engagement they'd been pretending had become real was now being pushed to its inevitable conclusion. Elena looked at Dante, seeing the question in his eyes, understanding that this was her chance to walk away before things went too far. But walking away would mean leaving this man who had become her home, abandoning the future they'd just started to imagine together. "Then we better start planning a wedding," she said, watching relief and something deeper flood his expression. "But Dante, when we stand at that altar in 6 weeks, I need you to know. I'm not going to be pretending. Not about this. Not anymore." Dante pulled her close, holding her like she was the only thing keeping him anchored to the earth. "Good," he breathed against her hair. "Because neither am I." The game had changed. The fake engagement had become a real relationship. And in 6 weeks, Elena Rossi would become Elena Marchesi, not because of a debt or a business arrangement, but because she had fallen in love with a dangerous man who had proven to be so much more than his reputation suggested. Now all they had to do was survive long enough to make it to the altar. And with Marco Vitale still circling like a shark scenting blood in the water, survival was far from guaranteed. The 6 weeks before the wedding passed in a blur of violence and lace swatches, or blood and bouquet consultations. Elena had always known that Dante Marchesi existed in a world of shadows and secrets, but watching him systematically dismantle Marco Vitale's empire was like witnessing a chess master execute a strategy years in the making. Every move was calculated, every strike precise, and through it all, Dante kept her insulated from the worst of it, coming home with shadows in his eyes and tension in his shoulders, but always making time to ask about her day. To look over wedding invitations with an attention to detail that surprised her. Sophia had returned from college for the wedding preparations, and the joy in her sister's eyes every time she talked about the upcoming ceremony made Elena's heart ache with both love and guilt. Sophia believed wholeheartedly in the fairy tale, that her struggling older sister had found a powerful man who adored her, that something beautiful had bloomed from the ashes of their father's mistakes. That Elena and Dante had agreed to maintain the pretense with Sophia, but as the weeks passed and Elena watched her fiancé interact with her baby sister, patient with her endless questions, generous with his time and resources, genuinely interested in her dreams of becoming a teacher, she realized it wasn't entirely pretense anymore. Dante was creating the family Elena had always wanted, building something real from the fiction they'd constructed. The bridal appointments were surreal experiences where Elena's two worlds collided. Isabella attended every single one, having appointed herself both maid of honor and Elena's protector in the complex social hierarchy of the Marchesi family. During a particularly tense fitting, when the seamstress stepped out and Sophia was distracted by her phone, Isabella had caught Elena's eye in the three-way mirror. "He's making his final moves against Marco tonight," Isabella said quietly, adjusting the lace on Elena's sleeve with unnecessary focus. "Luca told me. It's been planned for weeks, but tonight is when it ends, one way or another." Elena's hands had trembled as she touched the white silk of her wedding gown. "Does he know? Has anyone told him that I need him to come back?" The question emerged small and terrified, stripped of all pretense. Isabella's reflection met hers in the mirror, her sharp features softening with something that might have been sympathy. "Everyone knows, darling. The whole family knows. Giovanni hasn't stopped talking about how his son finally found someone who loves him for more than his name. Even the old guard, the ones who thought you were just a pretty distraction, they've seen how Dante looks at you, like you're the son, and he's been living in darkness for years." She'd squeezed Elena's hand then, quick and fierce. "He'll come back. Dante always comes back. But marrying into this family means learning to live with that fear, Elena. Every time he walks out the door, you'll wonder if this is the time he doesn't come home. Can you handle that?" Elena had looked at herself in the wedding dress, at the woman she was becoming, and realized she didn't have a choice. She'd already given Dante her heart, already made her decision the night she'd kissed him in his living room, and felt something fundamental shift in the universe. "I can handle it," she'd said, and meant it. But that night, as the hours ticked past midnight and Dante's phone went straight to voicemail, Elena discovered that handling fear and not feeling it were two very different things. She wore a path in the penthouse carpet, wrapped in one of Dante's shirts, her mind conjuring 1,000 terrible scenarios. When she'd finally called Luca in desperation, his careful non-answers had only made things worse. Dawn was breaking over the city when she heard the elevator, the mechanical whir that announced someone was coming up to the penthouse. Elena's heart lodged in her throat as she ran to the entryway, and the sight that greeted her would be burned into her memory forever. Dante stood in the doorway, his expensive suit torn and bloodied, his left arm hanging at an awkward angle, his face pale with pain and exhaustion. But he was alive. He was standing. And when his eyes found hers, relief so profound it was almost physical crossed his features. "Marco?" Elena's voice cracked on the single word. "Gone. It's over." Dante took a step toward her and swayed, and then Elena was there, her arm around his waist, taking as much of his weight as she could manage. He was so much larger than her that it should have been impossible, but adrenaline made her strong, fear made her capable. "I'm sorry," he murmured against her hair as she helped him to the sofa. "I promised I'd call. I lost my phone in the... It doesn't matter. I'm sorry, Elena." "Shut up!" Her hands were shaking as she examined his injuries, her mind automatically cataloging. Gunshot wound to the shoulder, bruised ribs, cuts and abrasions everywhere. "We need to get you to a hospital." "No hospitals. Too many questions." Dante caught her hand with his good one, his grip weak but insistent. "There's a doctor. He's on the family payroll. Luca's calling him. He'll be here within the hour. I needed to see you first. To know you were safe." Elena wanted to scream at him, to rage about the terror of the last 8 hours, about the way her heart had stopped every time a car passed on the street below, about the future she'd imagined crumbling every time another minute ticked by without word. Instead, she pressed her forehead to his, breathing him in, sweat and copper and gunpowder, and underneath it all, that scent that was purely him. "Don't ever do that to me again. Whatever you have to do, whoever you have to fight, you call me. You let me know you're alive. Promise me, Dante." "I promise." His hand cupped her face, thumb tracing the tear tracks she hadn't realized were there. "It's done, Elena. Marco's organization is finished. His allies have scattered, and he..." Dante's voice dropped to something harder. "He won't hurt anyone ever again. You're safe. Sophia's safe. We can actually have the life we've been pretending to plan." The doctor arrived 20 minutes later, and Elena refused to leave Dante's side while he worked, holding his good hand while he gritted his teeth through having the bullet removed, watching his face go gray with pain when his ribs were wrapped. The doctor, a dignified older man named Dr. Russo, who had clearly seen this kind of thing before, gave Dante a shot for the pain and a lecture about rest that they both knew would be ignored. One then departed with a promise to return in 3 days to check the stitches. As the medication began to take effect, Dante's eyes grew heavy, but he fought against sleep with visible effort. "The wedding," he slurred slightly. "Still want to marry a man who comes home bleeding?" Elena began carefully unbuttoning his ruined shirt, her touch gentle around his injuries. "I'm not marrying the man who comes home bleeding. I'm marrying the man who fights his way home. There's a difference." She met his eyes, letting him see everything she felt, the fear, the relief, the love that had grown from pretense into something undeniable. "You could have sent Luca, or called, or texted, but you came yourself, injured and exhausted because you knew I was waiting. That's the man I'm marrying, Dante. The one who keeps his promises, even when it costs him. I love you." The words emerged rough and unpracticed, as if he was saying them for the first time in his life, and maybe he was. "I know I haven't said it. I know we've danced around it, but I need you to know. You weren't supposed to be anything more than a solution to a problem, and instead, you became everything. You became the reason I want to wake up in the morning, the reason I'm trying to build something better than what my father built. I love you, Elena Rossi. And in 4 days, I'm going to stand at an altar and promise you forever, and I'm going to mean every word." Elena's tears fell freely now, splashing onto their joined hands. "I love you too. So much it terrifies me. So much that when you didn't come home, I felt like I was drowning. So much that I don't know how I survived before you." She kissed him then, carefully avoiding his injuries, tasting salt and something bittersweet. "Now sleep. Doctor's orders. I'll be right here when you wake up." "Always?" The question was vulnerable, the walls completely down. "Always," Elena promised, and watched him finally surrender to exhaustion. The wedding took place on a crystalline Saturday in early December, in the same historic church where 3 generations of Marquises had married. The building was small and intimate, filled to capacity with dangerous men in expensive suits and the women brave enough to love them. Poinsettias lined the aisle, and candlelight flickered off stained glass windows, casting rainbow shadows across the wooden pews. Elena stood in the bridal suite, Sophia fussing with her veil while Isabella touched up her lipstick, and marveled at how surreal this moment felt. 6 months ago, she'd been drowning in debt and fear, her future a narrowing tunnel with no light at the end. Now she wore a dress that cost more than she used to make in a year, about to marry a man who had somehow become her salvation and her choice in equal measure. "You look beautiful," Sophia whispered, tears already forming. "I'm so happy for you, Elena. You deserve this. After everything with Dad, after all the struggles, you deserve to be loved like this." Elena hugged her sister carefully, mindful of the dress. "Thank you for being here. For being you. This wouldn't mean anything without you." Isabella appeared at Elena's shoulder, pressing a small velvet box into her hand. "From Dante. He wanted you to have it before you walked down the aisle." Inside was a delicate gold bracelet, clearly antique, with a small charm, a key. The note tucked beneath it read simply, "You've already unlocked everything that matters. D." The tears Elena had been holding back threatened to spill, but Isabella was there with tissues, muttering about waterproof mascara and Italian men with terrible timing. When the church bells began to toll, marking the hour, Sophia took her position as maid of honor, and Isabella gave Elena one final appraising look. "Last chance to run," she said, but her smile was warm. "No one would blame you. This life isn't easy." "I'm not running." Elena straightened her shoulders, feeling the weight of the bracelet on her wrist, the weight of her choice settling into certainty. "I'm running toward him. There's a difference." The doors opened, and Elena saw Dante waiting for her at the altar. His left arm was in a sling beneath his tuxedo jacket, evidence of the battle fought and won, but he stood straight and tall. His eyes locked on her with an intensity that stole her breath. Next to him, Luca stood as best man, and in the front pew, Giovanni watched with tears streaming down his weathered face, finally seeing his son find the happiness he'd sacrificed his own life for. The walk down the aisle felt both endless and too short. Elena was aware of the weight of dozens of eyes watching her, assessing her, judging whether she was worthy of their air. But she only saw Dante. He saw the way his careful composure cracked when she came closer, saw something that might have been awe across his features as he took in the sight of her in white. When she reached him, Dante extended his good hand and Elena placed hers in it without hesitation. Father Carmine, who had baptized Dante 32 years ago and probably heard confession from half the congregation, smiled at them both with genuine warmth. "Dearly beloved," he began in accented English, and the ceremony unfolded with ritualistic beauty. The readings spoke of love and sacrifice, of two becoming one, of promises made before God and witnesses. But it was the vows that would stay with Elena forever. When Dante spoke, his voice carried clearly through the church, no longer the careful business negotiator or the cold heir apparent, but a man stripped bare by truth. "Elena, 6 months ago, you walked into my life offering yourself as collateral for a debt, and I thought I was making a business deal. I thought I was solving a problem. I didn't know I was finding my salvation. You've given me something I thought I'd lost 5 years ago. Hope. Hope that I could be more than my father's son, more than my family's heir, more than the reputation that precedes me. You see me, really see me, and you choose me anyway. That's the greatest gift anyone has ever given me. Today, I promise you my protection, my loyalty, my truth, and my love. All of it. For as long as I draw breath, you're my partner, my equal, my home, until death do us part. Elena's hands trembled in his as she spoke her own vows, her voice thick with emotion but steady with conviction. Dante, you've taught me that strength and gentleness can exist in the same person, that power doesn't have to mean cruelty, that I can be loved without losing myself. You've given me safety when I had none, family when I felt alone, and a future I'd stopped believing in. Today I promise you my trust, my support, my honesty, and my heart, freely given, never obligated, chosen every day. You're my partner, my protector, my unexpected blessing, until death do us part. When Father Carmine pronounced them husband and wife, when Dante carefully lifted her veil with his good hand and kissed her with a tenderness that made the congregation collectively exhale, Elena tasted salt, his tears or hers. She couldn't tell. It didn't matter. They were married now, unbound by more than contracts and arrangements, their pretense finally transformed into something permanent and true. The reception at the Marchesi estate was a lavish affair, the kind of celebration that made it into society, pages and family lore. Elena danced with Giovanni, who told her she'd given him his son back from the grave. She danced with Luca, who whispered that he'd never seen Dante at peace until her. She danced with Sophia, who was radiant with happiness for her sister. And finally, only carefully, she danced with her husband. Dante held her as close as his injured shoulder would allow, their movements slow and intimate despite the crowd watching. "Having regrets yet?" he asked, his voice pitched for her ears only. "Not even one." Elena looked up at him, seeing past the intimidating exterior to the man beneath, the one who brought her coffee in the mornings, who kept watch outside her door when she had nightmares, who had fought his way home to her because he'd promised. "Although I do have a question. Anything. That villa in Tuscany you mentioned, the one that belonged to your mother, where you said we could fill it with art and olive groves and maybe someday children. Is that offer still open?" Dante's expression transformed, something like wonder replacing the careful control he usually maintained. "You want that? A life away from all this? Somewhere we can breathe?" "I want that," Elena confirmed. "Not forever. Your family needs you, and I understand that now. But sometimes, a place that's just ours, where you can be the man who loves art history instead of the heir who runs an empire, where I can paint again, like I used to before Dad died and I had to be practical, where our children, if we're blessed with them, can run through olive groves and know their father as more than a name people whisper with fear." "Elena Marchesi," Dante said her new name like a prayer. "You've just made me the happiest man in this church." "Yes, 1,000 times yes. We'll restore it together, make it everything my mother dreamed of. Our sanctuary." They left the reception early, to the good-natured teasing of the guests and Giovanni's booming laughter. In the car back to the penthouse, their home now, not just Dante's, Elena's head rested on her husband's good shoulder, her hand clasped in his, the gold bracelet catching the light. "No more pretending?" she whispered, echoing words from a conversation months ago. Dante brought her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her wedding band. "Never again. This is real, Elena. You and me, whatever comes next. Partners." "Partners," she agreed, and felt the last piece of uncertainty fall away. As the city lights blurred past the window, Elena reflected on the strange journey that had brought her here. From a desperate woman offering herself as collateral to a bride who'd found love, in the most unlikely place. She thought about her father, and about whether he'd be proud or horrified at where his debts had led. She thought about Sophia, safe and happy and pursuing her dreams. She thought about the villa in Tuscany, about hypothetical children running through olive groves, about a future that stretched bright and possible before her. Most of all, she thought about the man beside her, dangerous and gentle, powerful and wounded, who had been given her as a business arrangement and chosen to love her instead. Dante Marchesi had kept every promise he'd made to her. He'd protected Sophia, erased the debt, handled Marco, and given her freedom even when she'd agreed to captivity. And in return, Elena had given him something he'd stopped believing existed. A love that saw past the reputation to the man beneath, that chose him every day not out of obligation, but out of genuine desire. The game they'd been playing was over. The engagement had been fake, but the marriage was irrevocably real. And as Dante's arms came around her in the car, careful of his injuries but undeniably possessive, Elena realized that sometimes the best love stories are the ones that start as something else entirely. A business deal, a desperate bargain, a pretense maintained for the sake of appearances. Because when you strip away the pretending, when you stand before another person completely honest and completely vulnerable, that's when real love begins. Not in the falling, but in the choosing. Not in the arrangement, but in the staying. Not in the vows spoken before witnesses, but in the quiet promises made in the dark when no one else is watching. Elena and Dante had started as strangers bound by debt and necessity. They'd become partners in an elaborate fiction. And now, finally, they were exactly what they'd been pretending to be all along. Two people who had found each other in the darkness and chosen to build something beautiful in the light. The pretending was over. The real story, their story, was just beginning, and it would be better than any fiction they could have invented because it was true. If you loved Elena and Dante's journey from pretense to passion, please like this story, share it with fellow romance readers, and subscribe for more tales of unexpected love in unlikely places. What did you think of their story? Would you take the risk Elena took? Let me know in the comments below. And if you're craving more Mafia romance with heart, hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more stories of love that conquers all, even in the most dangerous of worlds. Thank you for reading.